My name is James, and I've been married to Claire for 10 years. We met in college and built a life together that I thought was solid. I've always been proud of our relationship, full of mutual respect, trust, and support. Or at least, that's how I saw it. Claire works in marketing, and her job has always kept her busy. Over the years, I'd gotten used to the late nights, the client dinners, and the occasional overnight stays when she had to travel for work. It was just part of her career, and I respected her dedication. But a few months ago, something changed. It started with a single business trip. Claire told me she needed to travel to Chicago for a 3-day conference. She sounded stressed when she mentioned it, saying she had a lot to prepare for and that her boss was putting pressure on her. I didn't think much of it at the time. I kissed her goodbye at the airport and wished her good luck. When she came back, she seemed exhausted but happy, talking about how productive the trip had been and how she'd networked with some important clients. But then came another trip. This time, it was to Denver for what she described as follow-up meetings. 2 weeks later, she had to fly to Boston for a strategic planning session. The frequency of these trips was unusual, but Claire insisted they were necessary for her role. "I know it's a lot," she said one evening, as she packed her suitcase for yet another trip. "But this could really help me get that promotion I've been working toward. Just bear with me a little longer, okay?" "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. I wanted to be supportive, even though a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the trips that felt strange, it was her behavior. Claire had always been organized and focused, but now she seemed distracted, almost distant. She spent more time on her phone, often stepping out of the room to take calls or answer messages. And when she was home, she seemed preoccupied, as if her mind was elsewhere. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen, quickly swiped it away, and set her phone face down on the coffee table. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," she said, a little too quickly. "Just work stuff." It wasn't like Claire to be so secretive. She'd always been open with me, sharing details about her day and even venting about her clients or coworkers. But now, she seemed to be keeping something to herself. At first, I tried to convince myself I was overthinking things. Claire was ambitious and driven, qualities I'd admired about her from the beginning. Maybe these trips were just part of her career taking off. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It wasn't until her next trip, to San Francisco, that I decided I needed to pay closer attention. When Claire told me she had to go to San Francisco for a high-priority client meeting, something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her tone was rushed, almost rehearsed, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. "Just a couple of days," she said, folding clothes into her suitcase. "I'll be back before you know it." I nodded, but my gut told me there was more to the story. The morning she left, I dropped her off at the airport. She kissed me on the cheek, her goodbye warm but hurried. As I watched her walk away, dragging her carry-on behind her, the uneasiness I'd been feeling for weeks settled into something more concrete. Something was wrong. That evening, I sat in the quiet of our home, replaying the past few weeks in my mind. The trips, the secrecy, the way she always seemed preoccupied, it all felt like puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit together. I grabbed my phone and opened her Instagram account, scrolling through her posts. Claire wasn't one to overshare on social media, but she occasionally posted pictures from her trips, landmarks, meals, hotel views. There were a few from her recent trips, all perfectly curated. A photo of a fancy dinner captioned, "Client dinner success." A shot of a city skyline with the text, "Late night, early flight." To anyone else, these posts would seem harmless. But to me, they felt staged. Like she was trying too hard to paint a picture of her work life. I clicked on the photos to check the tags and comments. Nothing unusual there, just coworkers and friends liking the posts and leaving generic comments. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing. The next day, I decided to call her at lunchtime, hoping to catch her during a free moment. "Hey, Claire," I said when she answered. "How's San Francisco?" "It's good," she replied, her voice cheerful but distant. "Busy, as usual. I've been in back-to-back meetings all morning." "Sounds hectic," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. "What's on the agenda for tonight?" "Just another client dinner," she said. "Nothing exciting." I wanted to believe her, but her answers felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. "All right, well, don't work too hard," I said, forcing a chuckle. "I'll see you when you get back." "See you soon," she said before hanging up. I stared at my phone for a long time after the call, trying to decide what to do. Part of me felt guilty for doubting her. After all, she'd never given me a reason not to trust her before. But another part of me couldn't ignore the little inconsistencies, the growing distance between us. That evening, as I sat in the living room, I noticed Claire's laptop sitting on the desk. She rarely used it at home, preferring her work laptop or phone, but I figured it was worth a look. I opened it, feeling a pang of guilt as I typed in her password, a combination I knew from years of helping her troubleshoot her tech issues. The desktop screen loaded, and I navigated to her email. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the touchpad. This felt like crossing a line. But the doubts swirling in my mind pushed me forward. I searched her inbox for anything unusual, meeting confirmations, itineraries, client correspondence. Most of it seemed legitimate, but then I saw an email thread that caught my attention. It was from a personal email address I didn't recognize, and the subject line read, "Can't wait to see you." My heart started to race as I clicked on it. As the email opened, my chest tightened. The sender's name was unfamiliar, Eric W. It wasn't a work email, it was a personal address. My pulse quickened as I began to read the thread. "Eric, can't wait to see you again this weekend. I've booked us dinner at that Italian place you liked last time. Let me know if you're craving anything else, and I'll make it happen. Claire, that sounds perfect. Thanks for being so thoughtful. I can't wait either. Love." My eyes scanned the rest of the thread, my stomach churning with every line. The messages were filled with casual flirtation, inside jokes, and references to shared moments I had no knowledge of. I read one from a week ago where Eric mentioned how much he'd enjoyed spending the evening in with her, and another where Claire told him he was exactly the escape she needed. Escape. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Escape from what? From me? From our life? The emails left no room for doubt. Claire wasn't going on business trips. She was traveling to meet Eric. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just an emotional affair, or had it become physical? Was this a temporary lapse in judgment, or had our entire marriage been a lie? The shock quickly gave way to anger. I felt betrayed in a way I couldn't even put into words. The woman I had trusted for over a decade, the woman I had built a life with, had been lying to me. But I also felt something else, a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't just about the betrayal, it was about the realization that the person I thought I knew so well was capable of something like this. Fueled by a mix of fury and desperation, I searched for more clues. I opened her calendar and scrolled through the events she'd added for the past few months. Most were work-related, but now, with the context of Eric's emails, they took on a different meaning. Client meeting, Denver. Strategy session, Boston. Conference, Chicago. Were any of these real? Or were they just cover stories for her trips to see Eric? I found myself scrolling through her photos next. Most of the pictures were ordinary, landscapes, selfies, and random snapshots of her day. But one album caught my eye, a hidden folder labeled Favorites. Inside were pictures of Claire and Eric together. There was a shot of them at a restaurant, both smiling over a candlelit table. Another of them hiking, their arms around each other. And then, the one that shattered me completely, a photo of them sitting on a hotel bed, laughing, their faces inches apart. I slammed the laptop shut, unable to look at it any longer. My emotions were a swirling storm of rage, hurt, and disbelief. I sat in the darkened living room for hours, trying to process everything. My mind kept jumping back and forth between memories of our marriage and the evidence I'd just uncovered. Had there been signs I missed? Moments when I should have seen the cracks forming but didn't? I thought back to all the times Claire had reassured me that these trips were for work, how she'd kissed me goodbye with a smile, how she'd acted like everything was perfectly normal. It was all a lie. By the time the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. Claire would be coming home that evening, and I needed answers. No more pretending, no more excuses, I was going to confront her. I wasn't sure how the conversation would go, or if I was ready to hear what she had to say. But one thing was certain, the life we had before was over. The hours leading up to Claire's return felt excruciatingly slow. My emotions swung between anger and sadness, disbelief and grim determination. I knew I had to confront her, but the thought of actually saying the words, of bringing her lies into the open, was daunting. By the time her flight landed, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the laptop closed but within reach, my mind rehearsing every possible scenario. Would she deny it? Would she break down and confess? And, most importantly, would I even believe her? When I heard the sound of her key in the door, my heart began to race. I watched as she walked in, her suitcase rolling behind her, a tired but contented smile on her face. "Hey, honey," she said, setting her bag down and kicking off her shoes. "You won't believe how crazy this trip was." I barely had a minute to myself. I didn't respond right away, just stared at her, taking in the sight of the woman I'd loved for years, now a stranger to me. "James," she asked, noticing my expression. "Are you okay?" "I think we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but cold. Her brow furrowed, and she pulled out a chair to sit across from me. "What's wrong?" I reached for the laptop, opening it and navigating to the email thread with Eric. I turned the screen toward her, watching as the color drained from her face. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my tone sharp. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. "James, Don't," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Don't lie to me, Claire. I've read the emails. I've seen the photos. I know you've been meeting him during your so-called business trips." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice muffled. "Sorry?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done? How long has this been going on?" She lifted her head, tears streaming down her face. "A few months," she admitted. "It started when we reconnected at a conference. I didn't plan for it to happen, James, I swear. It just spiraled out of control." "Spiraled out of control?" I repeated, incredulous. "You lied to me, Claire. You lied to my face over and over again while you were sneaking around with him. Do you even care about what this has done to me? To us?" "Of course I care," she cried. "I love you, James. I never stopped loving you." "Love?" I said, shaking my head. "You don't do this to someone you love." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, suffocating. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but it did little to soften the rage I felt. "Why, Claire?" I finally asked. "Why him? Why now?" She took a deep, shaky breath. I don't know, she said, her voice trembling. I think I felt stuck. Like we were stuck. Work was stressful, and I felt like we were drifting apart. When Eric showed up, he made me feel seen. Like I mattered again. Seen. I echoed bitterly. So what? I didn't make you feel that way. All the years we've been together, and you couldn't come to me to tell me how you felt. Instead, you ran to someone else. I know I should have, she said, her voice breaking. I know I should have talked to you. But I was scared. Scared that if I told you how I felt, it wouldn't change anything. That we'd still be stuck in the same rut. Her words stung, but they also gave me a grim sense of clarity. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd given up on us without even trying to fix what was wrong. I stood up from the table, unable to sit still any longer. I need some air, I said, my voice flat. James, please, she said, standing up too. Don't walk away. Let's talk about this. Let me make it right. I turned to face her, my expression hardened. You want to make it right? Then tell me this, is it over? Are you done with him? Yes, she said quickly, nodding. It's over. I'll never see him again. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, James, just give me a chance. I stared at her, searching for any sign of deception. She looked desperate, broken even. But could I trust her? Could I believe that she was truly willing to let go of Eric and rebuild what she'd broken? I don't know if I can do this, Claire, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive you. Her face crumpled, and she stepped closer, reaching for my hand. Please don't give up on us, she said. I know I don't deserve it, but I'll do anything to prove to you that I'm sorry. Anything. I pulled my hand away, the weight of her betrayal still too fresh. I need time, I said. I need to figure out if there's anything left to save. Without waiting for her response, I walked out the door, leaving her standing in the kitchen, her tears echoing in my mind. I drove aimlessly for hours that night, the city lights blurring past as my thoughts churned. I kept replaying Claire's words in my head, her tearful apologies and her explanation about feeling stuck. None of it made sense to me. If she felt unhappy, why didn't she tell me? Why didn't we try to fix things together? The memory of her emails with Eric cut through my mind like a knife. The casual intimacy between them, the plans they'd made, it felt like a betrayal not just of our marriage but of the life we'd built together. By the time I parked at a quiet overlook outside the city, I felt emotionally drained. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the skyline, trying to make sense of my feelings. Anger, sadness, confusion, they all fought for space in my heart. I thought about the good times Claire and I had shared over the years. The vacations, the late-night talks, the way we used to laugh until our sides hurt. I wanted to believe that the woman I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. But the trust we'd built, the foundation of our relationship, felt irreparably cracked. The next morning, after a restless night spent on the couch, I decided to call someone I trusted, my best friend, Mark. Mark and I had been close since college, and he'd always been the guy I turned to when life got complicated. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I wanted to share the mess my life had become, but I needed an outside perspective. Hey, James, Mark said when he picked up. What's up? You sound off. I sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Can we meet up? I need to talk. Of course, he said without hesitation. Coffee shop or my place? Your place, I said. This isn't a public conversation. An hour later, I was sitting on Mark's couch, spilling everything. I told him about Claire's frequent trips, the emails, and the confrontation. He listened intently, his expression shifting between concern and disbelief. Man, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this, he said when I finished. That's a lot. Yeah, I said, running a hand through my hair. I just don't know what to do. Part of me wants to walk away, but another part of me feels like I owe it to our marriage to try. Mark leaned back, his brow furrowed in thought. Look, only you can decide if this is something you can work through. But whatever you do, don't rush it. Take the time you need to figure out what's best for you. I nodded, grateful for his level-headed advice. Thanks, Mark. I didn't see this coming. I thought we were solid, you know. Yeah, but even solid things can crack if there's enough pressure, he said. The question is, can you repair it, or is it too far gone? His words stuck with me as I left his place. The truth was, I didn't have an answer yet. When I got home that evening, the house felt eerily quiet. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up when I walked in, her face etched with worry and sadness. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," I replied, setting my keys on the counter. Did you decide anything?" she asked, her voice tentative. I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm still trying to figure out what I want." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'll give you as much time as you need. Just, please don't shut me out completely." Her plea hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the connection we used to share. But the pain of her betrayal was still too fresh, too raw. "I need space, Claire," I said finally. "I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk more." She nodded again, her expression a mix of sorrow and understanding. As I headed upstairs to the guest room, I couldn't help but wonder if time and space would be enough to heal what had been broken, or if some wounds were simply too deep to mend. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and silence. Claire kept her distance, giving me the space I'd asked for, but I could feel her presence everywhere, in the creak of the floorboards, the sound of her footsteps, and the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. I was desperate for answers, but I didn't know where to begin. Part of me wanted to confront Eric directly, to demand the truth from the man who had inserted himself into my marriage. But I knew that wouldn't give me what I truly needed, an understanding of why this had happened and whether there was anything left to salvage. Then, on a restless Friday night, I got an idea. I remembered the email thread between Claire and Eric, specifically a line where Eric had mentioned that Italian place you liked last time. I pulled out my laptop and opened the emails again, scanning them for more details. Sure enough, there were references to specific places, restaurants, hotels, even a hiking trail. With a mix of hesitation and determination, I started researching. I began by looking up the restaurant Eric had mentioned, a small Italian bistro in San Francisco. It didn't take long to find it online. Scrolling through the photos of the cozy dining room and the candlelit tables made my stomach churn. I imagined Claire sitting there with him, laughing and smiling, as if I didn't exist. But it was the reviews that caught my attention. Buried among the glowing comments about the food and ambience was a single, offhand remark. "Saw a cute couple here last week, a tall guy with dark hair and a blonde woman. Looked like they were having a romantic dinner. 5 stars for the vibe." My heart raced. Claire wasn't blonde, but she often highlighted her hair, and under the right lighting, it could appear lighter. Was this comment about her and Eric? I kept digging, searching for any trace of their time together. I looked up the hotels she'd stayed at during her business trips, cross-referencing dates and locations. Most of it seemed ordinary, but then I found a receipt in her email for a boutique hotel in Denver, a place she'd never mentioned. The receipt was for a single night, during a trip she'd claimed was for a multi-day conference. A single night. Fueled by a mix of anger and curiosity, I searched her laptop again. This time, I checked her browsing history, a trail she hadn't thought to erase. Among the usual sites for work and social media was something that made my blood run cold, a local jewelry store. She had visited the site several weeks ago, specifically looking at men's watches. My mind raced with possibilities. Had she bought something for Eric? Was this a token of their relationship, a gift to solidify whatever they had together? I checked her credit card statements and found the purchase, made during her Boston trip. It wasn't a conference expense, it was something personal. The final piece came when I stumbled across an archived folder in her email labeled Work Stuff. Inside was a single photo, a candid shot of Claire and Eric at what appeared to be a rooftop bar. Her arm was around his waist, his hand resting on her shoulder. They looked happy, like a couple with no secrets weighing them down. The date on the photo coincided with the night she told me she was at a team dinner. Armed with this new information, I felt my resolve harden. When Claire came home that evening, I was waiting for her at the kitchen table, the laptop open in front of me. "Hey," she said cautiously, sensing my mood. "Sit down," I said, my voice cold. She obeyed, her eyes darting between me and the laptop. "What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the photo from her email and turned the screen toward her. "Explain this," I said. Her face went pale as she looked at the image. "James, Don't lie to me," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "I found the photo. I found the receipt for the hotel. I even found the watch you bought him. So don't even think about making excuses." Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she didn't know where to start. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Didn't mean for me to find out." I repeated, my anger boiling over. "What exactly were you planning, Claire? To keep lying to me until you got bored with him? Or were you planning to leave me altogether?" Her silence was deafening. "What hurts the most," I said, my voice breaking, "is that you didn't just betray me. You planned it. Every trip, every lie, you put so much effort into hiding it. Why?" "I don't know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I was confused, James. I was unhappy, and I didn't know how to fix it. Eric made me feel alive again, and I let it get out of hand." "Out of hand?" I said, laughing bitterly. "This wasn't an accident, Claire. This was deliberate. You made choices every step of the way, and now you expect me to believe you're sorry." Her tears flowed harder, but I didn't feel any sympathy. For the first time, I realized just how deep her betrayal ran. And then she said something I wasn't prepared for. "It wasn't just me, James," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my anger giving way to confusion. "Eric," she began, hesitating. "He knew about us. About our marriage. And he didn't care. He wanted me to leave you." Her words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just an affair. Eric had been actively trying to dismantle my marriage, pushing Claire further and further away from me. And suddenly, I realized, this wasn't just between Claire and me anymore. Claire's admission that Eric had actively tried to come between us changed everything. My anger toward her remained, but now it was layered with a deep, simmering resentment toward a man I'd never met, a man who had inserted himself into my marriage, knowing full well what he was doing. "What do you mean, he wanted you to leave me?" I asked, my voice tight with barely contained rage. Claire hesitated, looking down at her hands. "He kept saying I deserved better," she said, her voice trembling. "That I shouldn't stay in a marriage where I felt stuck. He made it sound like he was the solution to everything I was unhappy about." "And you believed him?" I asked, my tone sharp. "I don't know," she admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "At the time, it felt like he understood me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But now, looking back, I realize he was just telling me what I wanted to hear." Her words didn't soften my anger, they only fueled it. Eric hadn't just been a passive participant in her betrayal. He'd actively manipulated her, feeding into her doubts and driving a wedge between us. "What else did he say?" I demanded. Claire hesitated, as if debating whether to tell me the truth. He said that you didn't appreciate me, she admitted. That you were too focused on your work to notice how unhappy I was. He made me feel like I deserved more. Her words stung, but they also gave me a grim sense of clarity. Eric had used her vulnerabilities against her, turning her dissatisfaction with our marriage into an opportunity for himself. That night, as Claire retreated to the guest room, I sat alone in the living room, staring at my phone. I had Eric's email address, but no direct way to contact him. Part of me wanted to let it go, to focus on Claire and what remained of our marriage. But another part of me, the angrier, more impulsive part, needed to confront him. After some searching, I found him. His LinkedIn profile popped up, along with his contact information, including a phone number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. Was this a mistake? What good would it do to confront him directly? But the anger boiling in my chest refused to be silenced. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed the button. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. Hello. Eric, I said, my voice low and steady. There was a pause. Who is this? This is James, I said. Claire's husband. The silence on the other end was deafening. I don't know what you're talking about, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. Don't lie to me, I snapped. I know everything. The emails, the hotel stays, the dinner dates. I know you've been trying to destroy my marriage. He didn't respond right away, but when he did, his tone was calm, almost smug. Look, man, I didn't force Claire to do anything. If she was unhappy with you, that's not my fault. His words hit like a punch to the gut, but they only fueled my fury. You knew she was married, I said through gritted teeth. And you still pursued her. You're a coward. I'm not the one who couldn't keep his wife happy, he shot back. The line went dead before I could respond. When I told Claire about the call the next morning, she looked horrified. You called him? She asked, her voice shaking. Yes, I said firmly. I needed to hear it from him. And you know what he said? He blamed me. He said you wouldn't have strayed if I'd been a better husband. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never should have let him get into my head. I let myself believe his lies because it was easier than facing the truth. What truth? I asked, my tone sharp. That I was the problem, she said, her voice breaking. That I was unhappy, but instead of working through it with you, I took the easy way out. I let Eric tell me what I wanted to hear because it made me feel better about what I was doing. But he was wrong, James. You were never the problem. I was. Her admission caught me off guard, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. As much as I hated Eric, I couldn't ignore the fact that Claire had made her own choices. She'd let herself be influenced by a man who didn't care about the consequences of his actions, but she'd also been complicit in her betrayal. You let him manipulate you, I said quietly. And now, I'm supposed to pick up the pieces of what you broke. I know, she said, her voice trembling. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can do better, that I can be the wife you deserve. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope, not for what we had, but for what we might still be able to rebuild. The fallout from my call to Eric left an even thicker tension in the house. Claire seemed rattled, walking on eggshells around me, while I vacillated between anger and exhaustion. Confronting Eric had given me no closure, if anything, it made things worse. He'd been smug and unapologetic, refusing to take any responsibility for his role in my wife's betrayal. But it wasn't just Eric I was angry at, it was Claire. As much as I wanted to place all the blame on him, the truth was that she had let him in. She had allowed him to chip away at the foundation of our marriage until it crumbled. I spent the next few days avoiding her as much as possible. I couldn't bring myself to have another heavy conversation, not yet. But the silence between us was suffocating, and I knew we couldn't go on like this. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room scrolling aimlessly through my phone, Claire approached me with a piece of paper in her hand. "What's that?" I asked, eyeing her warily. "It's a letter," she said, her voice tentative. "I wrote it for you." I've been trying to find the right words to explain how I feel, and this was the only way I could think to do it. I hesitated, unsure if I even wanted to read it. "Why not just say it to me?" "Because I'm afraid I'll mess it up," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Please, just, read it when you're ready." She placed the letter on the coffee table and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stared at the folded paper for what felt like an eternity, debating whether or not to open it. Part of me didn't want to hear what she had to say. But another part, the part that still cared, needed to know. Finally, I picked it up and unfolded it. The letter. The letter was long, handwritten in Claire's neat, looping script. "Dear James. I don't even know where to begin. I feel like I've already said so much, but none of it has been enough to express how sorry I am for what I've done to you, to us. I made choices that I can't take back, choices that hurt you in ways I can't even imagine. I betrayed your trust, and I'll never forgive myself for that. When I first met Eric, I was in a dark place. I didn't even realize it at the time, but I was unhappy with work, with myself, and yes, with our marriage. But instead of talking to you, instead of trying to fix what was wrong, I ran. I let Eric become a distraction, a way to escape the things I didn't want to face. And in doing so, I betrayed the person who has always been there for me. I know I've hurt you in ways I may never be able to fix. But I need you to know that I regret everything I did. Eric wasn't worth it, he was never worth it. You're the one I love, James. You're the one I want to spend my life with. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Not because I expect you to give it, but because I can't live with myself if I don't at least try to make things right. No matter what you decide, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. And I will spend the rest of my life making up for what I've done, whether we do that together or apart. Love. Claire. By the time I finished reading, my emotions were a tangled mess. Her words felt sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough to erase the pain she'd caused. I believed that she regretted her actions, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that it had taken being caught for her to come to this realization. I folded the letter and set it aside, unsure of how to respond. I wanted to believe that there was still something worth saving between us, but trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed her words in my mind. Eric wasn't worth it. You're the one I love. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that our marriage could survive this. But doubt lingered, whispering in the back of my mind, reminding me of everything I'd uncovered. The next morning, Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee, when I walked in. She looked up at me, her expression cautious. I read your letter, I said, my voice even. And, she asked, her hands tightening around her mug. I believe you're sorry, I said after a long pause. But I'm not sure if that's enough. Her face fell, but she nodded. I understand. I need more than apologies, Claire, I continued. I need to see that you're willing to do the work to fix this. And even then, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. Just tell me where to start. I didn't have an answer for her, not yet. But for the first time, I felt like we were at least moving in the right direction. Claire's willingness to do the work was a start, but I knew words alone wouldn't fix what had been broken. If we were going to have any chance of moving forward, we needed clear boundaries, rules to ensure there was no room for more lies or betrayal. That morning, as we sat at the kitchen table, I decided to lay everything out. If we're going to try and fix this, I began, there have to be some ground rules. Non-negotiables. Claire nodded, her expression serious. Of course. Whatever you need. First, I said, Eric is out of your life completely. No contact, no exceptions. If he tries to reach out, you tell me immediately. Agreed, she said without hesitation. I've already blocked him everywhere, but I'll make sure he has no way of contacting me. Second, I continued, no more lies. About anything. If something's bothering you, you come to me. If you feel unhappy, you tell me. I'd rather hear the hard truth than live through this again. I promise, she said, her voice trembling. No more lies. Third, I added, I need transparency. For now, I want access to your phone, your email, everything. I'm not saying I want to monitor you forever, but right now, I need to know there's nothing else you're hiding. Her face paled slightly, but she nodded. Okay. I understand. Her agreement to my terms felt like a small victory, but it didn't erase the underlying doubt in my mind. Could I really trust her to follow through? Or was this just another performance, a way to keep me from walking away? Over the next few days, Claire made a visible effort to stick to the boundaries we'd set. She handed over her phone without hesitation, even showing me her text messages and emails unprompted. She also deleted the few photos she had left of Eric, as well as their archived email threads. It was a small gesture, but it gave me a sliver of hope. She also suggested going to counseling, something I hadn't expected. I think we need help, James, she said one evening as we sat in the living room. Not just to rebuild trust, but to figure out what went wrong in the first place. I don't want to make excuses for what I did, but I want to understand why I let it happen so we can prevent it from happening again. Her words surprised me. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't just apologizing, she was actively trying to understand and address the root of the problem. All right, I said. Let's do it. Our first counseling session was awkward, to say the least. The therapist, Dr. Miller, was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and a talent for asking the kind of questions that made you squirm. Why don't we start with what brought you both here today, he asked, looking between us. I glanced at Claire, who nodded for me to speak first. My wife had an affair, I said bluntly. Dr. Miller nodded, his expression neutral. That's a serious breach of trust. Claire, how do you feel about what happened? I feel terrible, she said, her voice breaking. I know I hurt James in ways I can't even fully understand. I regret everything I did, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. Dr. Miller turned back to me. And how do you feel, James? Angry, I admitted. Betrayed. Confused. I keep wondering how we got here. If there was something I missed, something I could have done differently to prevent this. That's a common reaction, Dr. Miller said. But it's important to remember that Claire's actions were her choice. While it's natural to look inward, the responsibility for her decisions rests with her. His words were both comforting and unsettling. On one hand, it was a relief to hear that this wasn't entirely my fault. But on the other, it highlighted just how much of the burden was on Claire to make amends. As the session went on, we dug deeper into the issues that had been simmering beneath the surface of our marriage. Claire admitted that she had felt unappreciated and disconnected, but she also acknowledged that she had never communicated those feelings to me. I should have talked to you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I should have told you how I was feeling instead of running to someone else. I can't fix what I don't know about, I replied. You shut me out, Claire. You made me think everything was fine when it wasn't. Dr. Miller intervened, helping us navigate the emotional minefield of blame and accountability. By the end of the session, I felt emotionally drained but also cautiously optimistic. For the first time, it felt like we were beginning to address the deeper issues that had led to this point. That night, as we sat together in the living room, Claire reached for my hand. I hesitated for a moment before letting her take it. "Thank you for giving this a chance," she said softly. "I'm not doing this for you," I replied. "I'm doing it for us. Because I don't want to throw away 10 years without trying." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes, James. I promise." Her words felt sincere, but I knew actions would speak louder than promises. Only time would tell if we could rebuild what had been broken. The weeks following Claire's confession were a mix of tentative hope and lingering resentment. While she seemed earnest in her efforts to rebuild our marriage, attending counseling, opening up about her feelings, and sticking to the boundaries we'd set, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the way she avoided eye contact when certain topics came up, or how she occasionally seemed distant, as if her mind were elsewhere. I told myself I was being paranoid, that rebuilding trust would take time. But my gut wouldn't let it go. One evening, while Claire was in the shower, I noticed her phone sitting on the nightstand. She'd been diligent about showing me her messages and emails, but something told me to check again. I hesitated, my stomach twisting with guilt. But curiosity and doubt won out. I unlocked her phone and opened her text messages. At first, everything seemed normal, messages with friends, family, and coworkers. But then I saw it, an unsaved number near the top of the list. The most recent message was just 2 words. "Call me." My heart began to race as I opened the thread. The messages were brief, almost cryptic, but the implications were clear. "Unknown number, I miss you. Claire, I can't talk right now. Unknown number, can we meet one last time? Claire, not a good idea. Not a good idea." She hadn't said no. A surge of anger and betrayal washed over me as I stared at the messages. After everything we'd been through, after her tearful confessions, her promises to cut all ties, her vows to rebuild our trust, she was still in contact with someone. I scrolled up, desperate for more context, and that's when I saw his name, Eric. When Claire came out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in my hand. "James," she said, her voice uncertain. I held up the phone, the message thread still open. "Care to explain this?" Her face went pale. "James, I can." "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't tell me you can explain. Don't tell me this is nothing. You lied to me, Claire." Again. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they only fueled my anger. "I trusted you," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "I gave you another chance. I let myself believe that you were sorry, that you wanted to fix this. And the whole time, you were still talking to him." "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. "He reached out to me. I didn't respond." "You didn't respond?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't shut him down either. You didn't block him. You left the door open, Claire. After everything, you left the door open." Her tears fell freely now, but I felt no sympathy. I felt hollow, like every ounce of love and trust I'd tried to rebuild had been drained away. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice barely audible. I laughed bitterly. "That's the thing, Claire. You didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. Over and over again. And I can't do this anymore." "What are you saying?" she asked, panic flashing in her eyes. "I'm saying it's over," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done." Walking out of that house for the last time was surreal. It wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of everything Claire and I had built together. Every corner held memories, laughter from lazy Sunday mornings, the smell of her cooking in the kitchen, the warmth of her hand in mine as we watched movies on the couch. But in that moment, those memories felt hollow, overshadowed by her betrayals. I packed my bag methodically, avoiding her tearful gaze as she stood silently in the doorway. Her voice broke through the tense air as I zipped the bag shut. "James, please don't do this. We can still fix this. I'll block him, I'll do anything, just don't leave. I turned to her, feeling a strange mix of sadness and finality. It's too late, Claire. You had your chance, and you chose him. I can't keep living like this, questioning everything you say, wondering if you're still lying. I'm done. She sobbed, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I couldn't. Comforting her in that moment would have felt like betraying myself. I walked out the door, each step heavier than the last, and as I drove away, I didn't look back. The silence in the car was deafening. My chest felt tight, my throat burned, but I refused to cry. I wouldn't give her that part of me anymore. The first few weeks on my own were a blur. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, a far cry from the life Claire and I had shared. The emptiness was both freeing and suffocating. On one hand, I didn't have to deal with the tension of her presence, the constant reminder of her betrayal. On the other, I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in over a decade. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind would replay the past year in excruciating detail. I'd remember the way she smiled when she talked about her business trips, the casual lies she'd told me without blinking. I'd imagine her with Eric, laughing, touching, sharing pieces of herself that should have been mine. Friends and family reached out, offering support, but I found it hard to open up. How do you explain the feeling of being utterly betrayed by the person you trusted most? How do you put into words the weight of realizing the life you thought you had was a lie? Claire tried to contact me several times. She left voicemails, sent long, heartfelt emails, even showed up at my office once. Each time, I ignored her. I knew that hearing her voice, seeing her face, would only reopen the wound. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I threw myself into work, started going to the gym again, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't a quick fix, but it gave me a sense of purpose, a way to reclaim the pieces of myself that Claire had broken. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting on what had gone wrong, not just with Claire, but with me. I realized that I'd ignored the warning signs for far too long. The distant conversations, the sudden increase in her work trips, the way she'd started guarding her phone, it was all there, plain as day. But I'd chosen to believe her, to trust her, because the alternative was too painful to consider. I also thought about the state of our marriage before Eric entered the picture. The truth was, we'd both let things slip. I'd taken her for granted, assuming that the love we'd built was strong enough to weather any storm. I hadn't noticed how disconnected she'd felt, how neglected she'd become. But none of that excused what she'd done. She could have come to me, told me how she felt, given us a chance to work through it together. Instead, she chose deception. She chose someone else. The second betrayal, the discovery that she'd stayed in contact with Eric even after promising to cut him off, was the breaking point. It wasn't just about the infidelity anymore, it was about the lies, the manipulation, the lack of respect for the effort I'd put into trying to forgive her. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the same fiery way I'd been before. Instead, I felt something colder, more final, disappointment. Looking back, I realized that the most important lesson I'd learned was about the fragility of trust. A relationship without trust is like a house built on sand, it may look stable, but it will collapse under the slightest pressure. Claire's betrayal didn't just break my trust in her, it broke the foundation of our marriage. No amount of apologies or promises could rebuild what she'd destroyed, because she'd shown me that her words weren't worth believing. I also learned the importance of recognizing when to let go. There's a difference between fighting for a relationship and clinging to something that's already dead. Staying with Claire after the first betrayal was a gamble, and when she betrayed me again, it became clear that she wasn't capable of the honesty and commitment needed to repair what was broken. Sometimes, walking away isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's an acknowledgement that you deserve better, that you're worth more than the lies and betrayal someone else has chosen to give you. In the end, letting go of Claire was the hardest thing I've ever done. But it was also the first step toward finding myself again, toward healing, and toward building a future that wasn't tainted by the weight of her mistakes.